Good. So I'm just going to wait here. And if you see me looking at the top here, Rachel, I've got my phone. So that's good. Oh, we're coming on now. Good.
Woohoo.
Hi, Rachel. Good to see you.
Hello. Hi.
Thanks for coming along and having a chat with us in the group. So we were just talking off air, right? And I think this is, so we've got to try and keep this to within the hour, right? I think it's going to be hard for us, Rachel, but you know, we can have you back, right? Hopefully, if it's a good experience, you want to come back. There's loads for us to talk about. Wait and see. Right, oh, hang on a minute, watch that there, because it's pinging me. Get rid of that.
Oh.
Yeah, good. So we're going to be talking about trauma today in lots of different forms, and I want us to kind of talk it so that we can just navigate through what is a huge topic really on its own right, I really appreciate your time today, and also for you to be able to share your passion and experience with us. So just for those listening in then, Rachel, tell us a little bit about yourself and your background and your connection to this topic.
Thank you for having me, first of all. It's genuinely such a pleasure to be here, so thank you. I guess before I even start with my experience, I probably want to give a bit of a trigger warning. So unfortunately, I've been very lucky to have the most amazing experience, but it's some experience that people might find difficult to hear about. So I guess I want to warn people that it is a potentially difficult subject, and I think any kind of trauma is difficult in that way. So if you feel as though you might struggle with it, then yeah, absolutely, kind of take some time. We can share some resources at the end of where to get support if you're in need of it. So yeah, I just wanted to say that before I kick off. So most of my experience, so I started off originally, I did a master's degree in animal behaviour. So that's how I got the kind of dog side of things. I ended up running a degree programme in applied animal behaviour and set up a behaviour clinic as part of that. So that's been the one strand to my career. And then always alongside, I've had this kind of work with children and young people. So I was volunteering, first of all, for a youth offending team, absolutely loved it. Then I started working as a therapeutic residential support worker for children in care. So that's where I really started to kind of develop an understanding of trauma, particularly for children and young people. I ended up working mostly with children and young people who had been sexually exploited. And then that led me on to working specifically in the area of human trafficking and modern slavery. So I ran a safe house. First of all, I started off as a key worker actually in a safe house for women who had been trafficked. And then I ended up managing that safe house, and then I ended up service delivery manager, so running all of the frontline support services for an amazing charity called Unseen. And so that was safe houses for women, for men, for children and young people, and an outreach service. So very much about the people that we tended to support had literally just been rescued or managed to escape. So it was the real kind of feeling of safety that was so important to foster in the building of relationships, rather than necessarily the therapeutic input. I think there tended to be a lot of frustration, I think, from staff sometimes that our service users weren't necessarily able to access mental health support, but actually they explained to us very clearly, and we understood it, but people have to feel safe and settled before they can start any kind of therapeutic input. And I think the same is very much true for dogs. So yeah, a lot of my experience, when I came back to working with dogs, I really felt as though there was a lot of crossover, and the more I got talking about it with people, I met some amazing people along. Oh gosh, sorry Andy, that's my Am I back? Okay.
You're back.
Sorry.
Yeah, back in the room.
Sorry, I had a thing ping up on my phone then I had to get rid of. Yeah, so I met some incredible people and just got talking and realized there was this kind of gap in understanding how much we need to look, to borrow your phrase, beyond the operant, especially when it comes to trauma, because you can't teach safety, you can only feel it. So how we go about creating that feeling of safety and building a loving, trusting relationship is the thing that's kind of really important to me. And I guess, yeah, that's what led me here today. So thanks.
I love that. You can't teach safety, you can only feel it. And I think that's just such an important point, isn't it? Because I think when we look at, especially a lot of the discussions regarding the beyond the operant questions, really, is we've really got to step back and think about this kind of random, arbitrary change of a behavior, and whether that is going to have any innate use or any internal value, and whether or not we just create an animal, in the case of dogs, really, who is just going through the motions, but internally is still struggling. And I guess when we think about trauma as a broader subject, I think there is a misconception that somehow it's just a brain thing. It's just a kind of a fleeting outlook that can be easily changed. And I think your experience of working in so many different settings must have shown you the complexities behind this, and therefore a window into the complexities of behavioral response generally, right?
Yeah, that's so true. And I think excuse me, one of the most important things for me is when we have to look at the message that we give children and young people when we talk about trauma. And actually, if we're only ever talking in terms of therapeutic input, so maybe the equivalent of, with us with dogs, it might be working on whatever their trauma related cues are, so looking at the triggers that they find scary and actively working on those. If we do that all the time, it's exhausting. and children and young people find it exhausting, but also we need to look at the message that it gives them. It kind of says, you're not good enough, I need you to be different, and that's not a good message to give a child or a young person. I'm not saying that dogs have that sense of self or would feel like that in any way, but it's still got to be really tiring to just be working on the challenges all the time. I think we need to get much better at recognizing the dog's strengths and the things that they like, and really making sure that we build on those. And that's why I talk a lot about a kind of strengths-based approach and a needs assessment, because building on the good stuff is just as important as dealing with the challenges. And I think that's something we probably need to focus more on, maybe as an industry.
That is so important, isn't it? Because that kind of friction or that disconnect between a needs-based assessment and a behavior-based assessment, having the kind of courage, especially as a practitioner, to turn up and say, right, what are the basic needs that we need to provide for this dog? What are the basic things that we can do to create what we hope the dog will connect to as feeling safe? Is often actually not done when we dive in with a protocol that is trying to get the dog to feel differently. When we were off air, you were talking about how even some of the procedures that you might want to follow, especially in the kind of in the retreat, the
safe house.
Safe houses, could actually be just as triggering. Could you explain that? Because I think this is important little point, actually.
Yeah. So even in the safe houses, we're obviously operating what we refer to in human psychology as a trauma-informed environment. So that involves two aspects. So the environment itself, so the physical environment of the safe house and how it's set up, how it's decorated, how the bedrooms are managed, that kind of thing. But then the other side of it is trauma-informed practice. So making sure that staff are interacting with clients in a way that is trauma-informed and creates that feeling of safety and relationship that means that they can then go on to develop or access more formal therapeutic input. And the difficulty with the safe houses is that very often we accidentally, or not accidentally, on purpose, but with very good reason, we have to replicate some of those things. So for example, the example I gave was if we're picking up a client and we're traveling to the safe house, we're not allowed to tell them where we're going. And that pretty much replicates their trafficking journey. Once they're with us, they're not allowed to tell even their friends or their family where they are. And again, that replicates some of the features of their relationship with the trafficker. So how we negotiate that is really difficult. And yeah, it's a very tough thing. And that's why it's so important to, Dan Hughes talks about this in his, I know we're going to come on to talk about place. Sorry, I'm jumping all over the place. He talks he talks about amygdala whispering, which I absolutely love. It's like my favorite phrase, because it is about giving the brain constantly that whisper of, you are safe, you're connected to me, and I'm holding you, and you can trust me. And I think that's an incredibly powerful thing that we can do that doesn't necessarily involve a 10-minute training session or an hour's therapy session. It's much more organic than that. And I'm really interested in the dogs that recover from trauma that don't necessarily have any therapeutic input, and there are loads of them. And there are also loads of dogs who have tons of therapeutic input that don't recover. So I think we don't yet understand the value of relationship. And that's something that with children and young people is very much starting to come through now. So again, Dan Hughes talks a lot about how the single most important factor in recovery from trauma for children and young people is a safe and nurturing relationship. And I'm absolutely sure that the same is true for dogs. What goes right for those dogs who do recover without necessarily any formal treatment plan from a clinical animal behaviourist, what goes right for them? And I think a lot of it is to do with relationship. And I'm super keen on place, which is we call it therapeutic reparenting. So it's a way of engaging the adults in a child's life in really kind of capitalizing on that relationship and maximizing its therapeutic value. So not a formal sit down, let's talk through the trauma session. It's about how you are 24/7 in the 95% of the time that you're not in a therapy session, or for a dog, you're not in a training session. Dogs learn all the time. So most of their learning is going to come from when we're just chilling out at home together. And how do we really maximize that relationship so that it's as therapeutic as it can be? And I think that gives us a lot more I think it makes recovery a lot more powerful, a lot quicker, a lot just better.
And this comes down to this thing about, anybody who's heard me talk about things, for me, the big focus is on the emotional experience. What is that? The fact that on a neurological, biological, physiological level, it's all these kind of things that are going on within our brain and our body. But on a personal level, it's what we make of that and what we take from that and how we feel about that. And that emotional experience is very unique. And having internal value and having, I call it emotional relevancy. So that means how emotionally relevant a process is, all those around us are to that need to feel safe and connected, right? Especially when we think about dogs, how emotionally relevant are we to our dogs when they're trying to seek relief, look for a connection? We can only be emotionally relevant if we are truly available, as in being available in the moment, And so I think this is the complexities of these things when we really step back, because we can feel, oh yeah, I'm really helping this dog because we're doing training, and now the dog's starting to engage in this process now and starting to engage in an activity. Is that activity emotionally relevant to the dog? Is there a connection there? Sometimes it can be, of course, and that can be the connection. But I've seen a lot of the dogs I've worked with, especially in the last year or two, where I felt braver as a practitioner to say, actually, do you know what? All those things you're describing in the initial kind of consult history form about the issues, we've just got to really get this dog to kind of connect on a very fundamental level, that kind of needs-based assessment. And I think we have to make sure we have the right language to connect to carers about this, so that they can see things a bit differently, and especially for those dogs who have had experienced the kind of acute or chronic traumas. You mentioned PLACE. Could you go through that as an acronym? Because I think it's really awesome, and it's very it's very relevant.
Yeah, so it's, like I said, it's a kind of therapeutic reparenting tool, if you like. So it's based on attachment. And again, I'm not saying dogs experience attachment in exactly the same way as children do, or and we don't know what their felt experience of loving a human being is. But we do know that in human psychology, there are great tools for engaging adults in the therapeutic reparenting of children. And that's essentially what we're doing with dogs, right? And especially as behaviourists, we're engaging other adults who then deliver the care to the dog. So yeah, I think it's really relevant. So it's PLACE stands for playfulness, love, acceptance, curiosity, empathy. And actually, we can probably dig a bit deeper into some of those, because they're not always. Play, for example, playfulness isn't just about let's turn everything into a game and let's not have any boundaries and all of that stuff. That's not what it's about. It's about that feeling of really building on what does the dog enjoy doing, what are their strengths, and then building on those instead of only focusing on the negatives. So that's part of it. But also another part of it is about repairing ruptures. So that's something that we talk a lot about with children and young people, that I think could talk about more with dogs. I think I'll probably get in trouble for saying this. I think we've come a long way in the last 20 years, right? We tend not to physically punish our dogs anymore. People generally have a good understanding of using positive approaches. But I also think that puts a huge amount of pressure on people. And I know some of my clients and myself feel a huge amount of guilt and shame for those times when we do. Sometimes I'm a human being before I'm a behaviourist, and guess what? Sometimes I lose patience with dogs, and as long as that's okay, that's part of being a human, and it's also part, to a certain extent, it's part of a dog's experience of living in a family. There are times where we have, Carl and I argue, my dogs are exposed to heightened emotions and raised voices and all of those things, and if we can acknowledge that and not be so ashamed about it, we can then consciously repair any ruptures. So it's kind of about using playfulness to be a bit more mindful of any ruptures in the relationship that happen because we're people and we're not perfect, and then maximizing what we can learn from that. So how much therapeutic value are we able to give? Because it's not just looking at that half-hour training session a day, we're looking at the whole 24 hours and being a bit more. I mean, we're talking to a captive audience, I suspect, in this group, because everybody's probably going to be extremely loving and very capable of creating trusting bonds with their dogs. I've no doubt about that, because they're in your group. But I think if we can really be mindful of it, we can start to use some of the tools that are available to us from work that's been done with children and young people, that I think can only benefit.
I think that's all amazing, and I think and that recognition, I call it the reality zone, right? Of
Yeah.
the fact that we lose our temper
You.
sometimes, and
Yeah.
and we say and do stuff, and because this is what I love about talking about the emotional experience, because we can do so if we step back without judgment. It's just, I get stressed sometimes. My Arthur, one of my dogs, he's I love him, but he's sensitive and he's hard work sometimes, and and that affects me sometimes. And and with my husband, sometimes we have words, as my mother used to call it. We just do
Yeah.
stuff, right? And I think it's just recognizing these things, and I think also the notion, I call it emotional consent, because we know about physical consent, right? We talk about consent all the time physically,
Yeah.
but emotional consent is something else to think about as well. That even though we might think, yeah, I'm going to be loving and trusting, and I'm going to kind of do this in this way, we have to really stop. And I think, especially with dogs who are quite shut down or who have really experienced trauma that might be difficult, we have to really slow that right down. And we're almost getting a little bit of feedback almost every moment, because that emotional consent is really important. What I love about place, the words, if we just look at it, a really important word in place is love, right? And we discussed this before in one of our little chats we've had off air, about how that word is kind of pushed to one side quite a lot when we think about therapies. And we hear a lot, don't we? Love just isn't enough. It might not be enough, but it's a good place to start.
And it's an essential ingredient, and I absolutely believe that. Do you know, one of my biggest regrets in my whole career is, oh, it's going to make me emotional, sorry. One of my biggest regrets is I loved one of the children that I looked after, and I truly loved her, and I was never able to tell her because it wasn't professional. And so I think it's, yeah, these are the children and young people who need love the most. We know that love is such a powerful tool in people's recovery from trauma, and yet these are the most vulnerable children who are the least likely to receive it because they have no safe relationships, and if they do, they're from somebody who's paid to give them, and that's really damaging to a child's self-esteem. So I think I hope that in the future we'll have a bit of a look at how we do maintain professional boundaries. Of course, they're there for the safety of the child, and I don't doubt that. But I think these children also need to hear that they're loved, and they deserve to feel that they're loved. And especially, yeah, I certainly regret not being able to tell children that I love them, and I hope that one day they'll either look back and know, or I'll be able to tell them. But yeah, I think that's the huge thing, and I've no doubt that the same is true for dogs. Relationships are everything, and for me, we've got such a moral responsibility to look after this incredible species that we've basically created, right? To form attachments in a similar way. There's not a huge amount of research, but there is some research that suggests they do form similar attachments. And with that comes a huge moral responsibility, I think.
I think this is one of for anybody who wants to think about a book on exploring trauma, this is personally one of the books that I read a couple of years ago, and it was really amazing. And that's the Boy Who Was Raised as a Dog.
Yeah.
And what I liked about that as a book was one of the main authors, Bruce Perry. He talked about going over some of those boundaries sometimes, and actually being supported in that by his kind of mentors and his kind of the people who have supported him through supervision. Yeah. And I think, and it's just a really interesting read for me, because the book is broken down into individual case studies, and it's basically, there's a lot around children and sexualized trauma. Oh, sorry, so yeah, I think it's a really interesting point, and even for us, I think as professionals working with dogs, we're still working with people, right? And we're still, I think, when you think about, I've experienced a lot of clients who I've definitely experienced secondary trauma, you know, because they've shared in their dog's trauma, that backstory. It's really affected them deeply. And I think, so we have to kind of look at all these things, especially as a practitioner, and at what level we're going in. Are we going to go in a very arbitrary, here's your training plan, this is what you're going to do, I'll call you again in a few weeks? Or with these type of situations, these type of dogs, do we have more of a kind of a supportive role regarding allowing that dog to find its own truth through that initially, before we start building extra layers in? Coming back to the place thing, because it's just such a good thing. I think the next big important word for me, I think it's a good thing to break down here, but it's the next one. So you covered the playfulness a minute ago. We've just touched on love. The next one, it's a really good one for me, and I've got my CAKE acronym. Compassion, awareness, knowledge, empathy, right? I think the A needs to be, because awareness is about acceptance, because it's being aware, right? It's being available. So there are lots of A's there. I could use that, but I think I might change the acronym up to say acceptance, awareness, stroke acceptance, because acceptance is such an important thing, and it's obvious, right? But it's really hard. It can be very hard, this acceptance of where meeting that person, meeting that dog, where they're at.
That's the thing, and it does very much need to be both. I think, especially when it comes to trauma, so dogs impacted by trauma, progress is very often going to be extremely slow, and finding ways of engaging carers with that it's difficult. It takes a huge amount of patience. These people are exceptionally selfless and giving, and so, but very often there is that tension between what we wanted. Why do we get dogs? Usually it's because we want the companionship, we kind of like the cuddles, and we want to be able to go for walks. Those are probably the big three, right? And they're the ones that are probably most impaired in dogs that are impacted by trauma. So kind of finding a way of meeting the dog where they are, but also acknowledging that the owner is where they are. I think I'm probably especially sensitive to this, because working in the kind of human trafficking field, I worked with a lot of young people who had been trafficked using juju, which is a kind of, it's a form of witchcraft or religion in West Africa, and it holds people who are trafficked aren't held with locked doors or chains. They're held through fear, and you don't change people's beliefs in a single support session, or in this case a single consultation. These are deeply held beliefs that we have to try and change or challenge over time, and that's a really difficult process, and we can only do that if we do meet people where they are. And it gives us a really powerful tool, because instead of coming across as judgmental and just saying, well, you're wrong and I'm right, which is basically what we're saying when we're trying to have a conversation like that, we're much more about understanding people's point of view, and then acknowledging why that's then so difficult for them to function in other ways. Does that make sense?
Usually, and it's a big thing that's missing in education in our industry, I think. So the dog-centered care professionals little course that I'm going to be running soon, which is about looking at the emotional experience, breaking that down in a safe little group, just groups of 10 each time, that we can find those truths. But I'm going to be putting a big emphasis on belief systems, value systems, how that drives judgment and expectations, and most importantly, the role of language in that. And we have to recognize that some of our clients, their belief, their worldview of the dog generally could be a complete 180 to the reality for that dog. And the complexities about all this, and this is why it's very difficult, because we have a lot of science that supports a lot of understanding, whether that's neurologically, physiologically, even the psychological disciplines. But even in the human field, we're only a fraction of a percent into working stuff out, because it's hard. Because the
Yeah.
reality is we all have a unique emotional experience. How we, people will experience things that we could class as traumatic, but for them personally, how they've processed that, how they deal with that, they don't carry that with them. They in that particular context, in that particular situation, they're a bit more robust about that, for them personally. And yet something else could happen that might not seem to somebody else to be that, but it could be deeply affecting. I think that's because, so when we're working with a human, let alone a dog, another species, it can be very hard to kind of navigate that through. And belief systems are important, and I talk about this quite a bit. I've got no way of proving it, I know. But why wouldn't a dog have a belief system themselves? What do they believe happens when the human leaves them? What do they believe happens when a human hand comes to touch them? It's a belief system. It's something that's very much there. And the other thing about trauma, Rachel, oh yeah, I'll come on to that in a second. How many time? Yeah, great. I just want to continue with this place because it's brilliant. So acceptance is very important, and it's harder than we might think, because the reason why I think we need more education on belief systems, value systems, because if we have to be aware of our own for a start off, if we're going to become what I call it being truly available. So if I'm going to be truly available for that client, truly available for that dog, I have to keep my own cognitive biases in check a little bit. I have to be aware of them. I have to just take a breath and just allow myself to be able to constantly be in a place of cognitive reappraisal. Otherwise, I'm going to start getting my own back up because I think, oh, you've really said that? Oh no, that's really wrong. So that's one thing we're thinking about. And that's very important. So to be truly accepting and to be truly available, we have to be aware of our own biases first. I think that's important, let alone recognizing the process that goes on with it. Then you've got
that's
curiosity.
really difficult. That's a really challenging thing to do, and it's often not very comfortable. I mean, I've done a lot of, particularly since we last spoke, actually, I've done a lot of kind of reflecting on my own values and beliefs, and I've had to challenge myself sometimes. I think I told you this when we spoke. One of my dogs, Finn, who's, all of my friends will laugh because I moan about him all the time. Obviously, I love him to bits, but yeah, I've very often had to question my own beliefs because I think I'm having a debate in my head whether I should say this. I'm just going to say it. So the thing with Finn is, I had a colleague called Domino who, I think, like lots of people, he started off my journey in animal behaviour. He was nearly killed by another dog and he was extremely fearful. And I had done no training whatsoever at that point. So I read a book and it said to scruff him gently by the neck, as his mother would. And that was how you correct unwanted behaviour. So that's what I did. And he was nearly killed by this other dog. And as he was kind of crawling back to me, I went to pick him up in my arms and he flinched away from me, and it absolutely broke my heart. And anyway, that started my whole journey in animal behaviour. Since then, I've now lost both my collies and I've got 2 new dogs. Hi. So when I got Rhea, I was absolutely determined I'm going to get it right with this dog. I'm not going to make the same mistakes as I did with Domino. And it's really difficult. And actually, things happen by accident as well. I'll never forget. We were doing a little search activity, and Rhea was poking around in the long grass, and she disturbed a wasp's nest, and I got stung 14 times all over my body. She got stung a little bit. She was petrified by me shouting, and she bolted home, and she then wouldn't come near me for a good couple of hours. So even with the best will in the world, things happen. and she now very much has this belief, I'm sure, that when I raise my voice or I show heightened emotion, I can invoke the wasps to come and get her. And she's anxious of me in certain contexts. And yeah, it's a difficult thing. So then again with Finn, I was determined to get it right, and I thought I'm going to be much more careful. I'd intended to be with Rhea and it didn't work out, so now I've got this new opportunity with Finn. And actually, yeah, he is not fearful of me in any situation, and that's lovely. But occasionally it's also hard, because when I say to him, go out for a pee, and he just looks at me going, no thanks, I'm comfortable where I am, and he's got no expectation whatsoever that I will then force him to do it or raise my voice or get cross. He's totally and utterly confident in his ability to say, actually, no, sod off, I'm enjoying just lying on the sofa. And that's even I spend a lot of time thinking about this, so I like to think that I should be kind of only rejoicing in that, but actually it's difficult and it tries my patience sometimes, and then I have to have a word with myself. So anyway, yeah, sorry, I'm rambling, but essentially what I'm saying is challenging your own beliefs is really hard, right?
It is, and I think everything you just really eloquently said there, I think we can all relate in our own ways about that, because navigating life as an individual is hard enough, right? Because we are often conflicted about things, and we kind of do our best, let alone trying to raise another human being, whether with a child or support another animal, right, or another species. It's hard, right? And we get it wrong sometimes. We get it wrong because we just aren't available in the moment. Yep. So I know with Arthur, say he's our sensitive boy, and if my own emotions are already quite raised, my brain that allows me to think, look, he's stressed, he can't help it, isn't available to me particularly. So it's easier just to say, oh, you sod off, and also on the flip side of that, when we think, this is the thing about emotional consent, if my husband's upset about something, I will think I need to save here, I need to rescue, I need to go, the things we feel, and sometimes we say and do the wrong thing, because we're very much acting from our own perception of what we think we should do, often actually to help ourselves more actually than actually helping the other. So it's complicated, right? That's the point, it's just complicated, and I think that's important. It's curiosity is the next one, and I think I think that again comes into awareness for me, this kind of thing. Definitely. About allowing that kind of observation to happen without judgment or label, and that can be hard, right?
Yeah, it's really difficult. Just to give, I guess, another example of this, and it may seem really obvious to people, but when you're living it, it just didn't feel obvious to me at the time, and I think that shows how difficult it can sometimes be. Finn, again, always Finn, he has this deeply annoying habit of really crashing into my legs when we're out walking. And for the longest time, I tried to train him out of it and teach him an alternative behaviour and reward him for doing that alternative behaviour. And I thought something else is going on here. And I had to really kind of look at him with curiosity and say, why is he doing this? And it became very clear. He starts wrestling matches with my other dog Rhea, who's bigger than him, and then he can't take it and he runs to my legs for protection. And it's as simple as that. So actually, by giving him some time out and stopping the other dog from being a bit overwhelming in her play, problem solved. And if we can really take the time to think about those things and what's going on from the dog's perspective, that can make a huge difference. And also it really reinforces our relationship, because he now, instead of me stopping him doing something, he now knows that he can come to me for protection, and I will listen to him and I'll help him. And that's a really important part of relationships.
I think hugely, and I think when we start thinking about going back to belief systems and value systems, that's why I think we need to educate more on this actually. You to keep moving around. I fell down the steps yesterday on my bottom. We've got 13 steps. I went from the top to the bottom, so I'm a little bit.
Good work.
I've got to give a 5-hour presentation tomorrow, so I don't know what's going to happen. Anyway, so I'm going to keep moving around a little bit. When we think about belief systems, the brain wants to stick with that, right? So that's why we have cognitive biases and belief filters, because it doesn't want to reappraise stuff.
Yeah.
and being truly available for that kind of, to that curiosity, that awareness, that observation, especially with others, and especially when we think about even our own relationships and things, we have to try and allow some of those filters to have to navigate some of those, to truly hear what's being said from an emotionally relevant point of view, rather than just what we think's being said and what we think we need to do. And I think this is another risk with the heavily opera model that we've got a little bit, which, because it's kind of easier not to have to do this stuff that we're talking about. So, and we can shift behavior relatively easily. If you're a good trainer, you can get a dog, regardless of their state, to do or not do anything. I think so. I think that's a really good, really interesting way of looking at it, Rach. Good. I just want us to. How are we doing for time? Yeah, we're doing okay. So there's so many things, Rachel. My head's absolutely spinning at the moment, so I'm going to try and bring this in. So one thing I think that's really important as well is that we think about what trauma really is, because we tend to think of trauma, and I don't think it's very helpful when a lot of stuff that gets put on social media about trauma, invariably it's somebody from the services, or somebody who's had something pretty horrific happen. I think for the general person, it makes them think that somehow trauma has to have a big event attached to it. And we were discussing off air about, this is just my personal view, but that actually many of us will have experienced trauma. We might not necessarily class it as that or see it as that, but when we think about especially what we experience through a structured education system as children, and the pressures that are put on us to conform, the lack of safe outlets, the pressure on us to have to behave in a way that might not be authentic for ourselves, the control that is put on, a lot of these kind of constructs we recognize around trauma. And a lot of the coping strategies that we have to develop, especially we were talking earlier about disassociation and dissociative kind of coping strategies, again very heavily connected to trauma. We build those up in childhood, but they become inappropriate as we become adults. And I think when we think about dogs, it doesn't have to be that the dog has necessarily had an individual traumatic event. In my opinion, I think even a dog who is more disconnected from a structured learning experience, who struggle to feel safe from an early age, where the kind of the carers have recognized that this dog is perhaps sensitive or struggles, but the answer or the solution that's been sold is, you've got to train more. So the dogs end up connecting to a series of behaviors that actually have no safe intrinsic value for them. What do you think about that as a kind of a thing to consider?
Yeah, that's really important. And I think, it's a huge area, and a lot of discussion, particularly with dogs. So I work with a lot of dogs who come from rescues from abroad, and obviously we know almost nothing about their histories, and a lot of the time the question is, have they experienced trauma, or have they had a lack of socialization? And actually, for me, it doesn't really matter. The important thing is how the dog is presenting, and how they got there isn't so important. If people, we tend to want to see events as traumatic or not traumatic, and actually, as you've quite rightly pointed out, different things are traumatic for different people, and the same is true for dogs. There's no such thing as a traumatic event. An event is traumatic if a dog experiences it as traumatic, for whatever reason that way may be. And I think the important thing is kind of to do with the dog's worldview. So if the way I think of it anyway is, if a dog they can have a worldview that is fundamentally, the world is a safe place. There might be some dangerous things in it, so they may have a specific fear of the car or of other dogs or men with beards or whatever it may be, but fundamentally the world is a safe place with dangerous things in it. Whereas when we think about trauma, for me, the world view is the world is a dangerous place. There may be some safe things in it, i.e., we can start to show a dog that they're safe, that they can trust us, and all of those things. But fundamentally, that worldview is different. And I think when children and dogs grow up in an environment that is not safe, we know that the brain develops differently. So they develop a bias towards detecting threat rather than detecting safety. So even when they are safe, they're not necessarily able to recognize those cues of safety in the same way. So on a deep neurological level, that ability to trust is blocked because the whole of the brain is geared towards threat detection. So does that even answer your question? I can't remember what your question
No,
was. Sorry,
it
I
does,
digress.
because
I expect.
we were just talking about the kind of the depth and breadth of how we understand trauma, I think. And I think that's a really good example there. And I think when we think about, I say this every time I speak to somebody about having Kathy Murphy here, because we need a neuroscientist all the time, right? But I know, you know, Kathy talks a lot about the kind of the plasticity of the young dog's brain, especially, and how those kind of fear and those kind of negative responses can be laid down very deep and very heavy, and then have an effect on how things are processed from then on, you know. And I think we know a lot actually about human childhood developmental, huge changes in brain development, you know, as in a lot of things are impaired. So that child, as they grow, may never be able to process in the way that you say and make those connections, and that can be very difficult. And this is the other problem about having arbitrary goals, because it's it might not have any truth for that person or that dog especially, and outlook is everything, right? So sometimes, as you say, we can put heavy emphasis on, oh yeah, well that must have been traumatic for the dog, or that wouldn't be. And it's, when you work with a dog who has been with their family since a puppy, and we start talking in these terms, they can find it quite difficult, because they're like, but we haven't done anything, we've never hit our dog, we've, you know, well, we're with our dog, and we you know, nothing, no dogs attack them or anything else. It's that worldview of that dog, and the things that can go, especially when they're young, that can get overlooked, and especially if we have a very heavy structured model around the dog, it can be extra difficult. So and when we think about the kind of general categorizations of trauma with acute, chronic and complex, I think we need to think in the same terms with dogs a little bit, really, about kind of not seeing it just as a label of, well, that's trauma, it must be this.
Yeah, I was just thinking that with what you were saying. I think sometimes part of the difficulty we've got in understanding dogs who have experienced trauma is that we all recognise the profound impact that childhood trauma has on humans, and that's because it's trauma that occurs throughout that period of development. And actually, that period of development, which is kind of the first 18 years, say, in children and young people, in dogs, it's that first kind of 6 months, but especially 3 to 12 weeks. And so I think a lot, we need to help carers understand that very often, even though they've provided nothing but a loving and a safe and very trusting environment, sometimes that's too late for the dog, because they do have that developmental trauma which has impacted how their brain has gone on to develop, and so behaviourally they may look very different from a dog who grew up in a safe environment. And it's not that they don't want, it's not a conscious decision to not trust people, it's that those structures just aren't in place. And at least it goes some way, hopefully, to alleviating people's kind of sense of shame or embarrassment or even frustration that the progress with these dogs is very, very slow. And yeah, that's probably why is those foundations are missing. And and we find that easy to understand in children because it's 18 years, but actually I don't think it's any less profound in dogs, even though the equivalent time period is much shorter. Does that make sense?
It does, and I think when you think about the kind of the normal structure around puppies, it kind of works very much against dogs like that, puppies like that. Some of these pups who've already come for many reasons, even at 8 weeks, with already developmental challenges, I think. And when we think about kind of principle of adverse childhood experience, ACE, and about what we class as that. And remember this word, the adverse, like we've discussed many times in this chat, it's down to the view of the child what's adverse, and the same with the dog, right?
Yeah.
And it can be very difficult. And when the owner, then the carer, because we tend to educate a lot about an operant approach, we tend to educate a lot about how to train, we tend to educate a lot about reinforce the good, ignore the bad. That can be very difficult for that young dog to break through and communicate what it needs to do in order to seek that safety. Which by the time then, when they get through that, when the adolescent brain is really kicking in and they're going through that kind of 6 to 18 month period, it's very difficult then. And the carers are just then, like you said, they can feel very shamed and say, well, my dog can't do that, or my dog won't listen to this, or all the kind of things that come along. And then a training solution really isn't going to work now because that dog has already, we've missed an opportunity there to, it's never too late, I know, but some of that seeking of connections to feel safe.
And also, I think with children and young people, we know that neglect is a form of trauma. And I think very often in this debate, whether something is traumatic or whether it's a lack of socialization, again, I'll probably get in trouble for saying this. For me, a lack of socialization is trauma. If we're not preparing dogs for the things, the challenges that we know they're going to face as adults, that's neglect. And actually, we need to, it's a probably a much deeper systemic issue. I've no doubt that the individuals, especially listening to this, again, they're going to be super clued up on this, but I think there's a much wider piece of work to be done, probably around breeders and it's such a huge amount of responsibility that we can prepare dogs for in that critical developmental period that we're probably missing, because by the time they get to their super clued up homes, they're almost, well, they're probably 8 weeks old, and that window of opportunity is gone. And that's definitely not to say that all breeders are not clued up on this stuff. It's just that I think as an industry, there's maybe more that we could do in that area.
I think, even the clued up breeders, and I work with some, and I think, there is an over demonization of breeders, because there are some who genuinely really want to try and get it right. But there is still, if you think that what it is you're trying to attain is that, you're going to be thinking your value system, belief system will be pushing everything to be that, right? But actually, the fundamental question about this whole thing, the Beyond the Operant chats, this dog centered care project, everything is actually asking, is that right? Fundamentally, historically, on a very kind of micro and macro level, is that actually right? So it's a huge thing, isn't it? Right? When I think about this stuff, and it's normally when I'm just about to drop off to sleep at night, I start thinking. 3 o'clock in the morning, you're still there talking, because it's huge, right? And I think this is what's so exciting about what's going on at the moment, because it's just allowing us to start stepping back and thinking more and having these conversations. Right, Rachel, there was other things I wanted to talk about, but we're coming up to the end on this today.
Wow.
So that was a quick out, wasn't it? It's amazing.
Yeah, super quick.
So there's a couple of things I think that I'd really like to kind of unpack. So maybe we could arrange that for another time. That would be amazing. Before we leave today, what is it that you think we need to be thinking about, being more aware of when we think about the terminology and the use of the word trauma with dogs?
Yeah, that's a really interesting question. I probably need to think about that some more, to be honest. I think one of the things, not necessarily to do with the term trauma, but I think one of the things generally needs to be safety. And like you said, safety, not necessarily what we consider it to be, but what the dog might consider it to look like. Because we can put a dog in an environment and know they've got a roof over their head, that food's coming, and when I reach towards you, I'm stroking you. But if the dog's belief is different to that, then how do we negotiate that, and how do we then help them to feel safe? So for me, it's very much about instilling a feeling of safety, and then that constant whispering of, you are safe and you can trust me, and what's the best way of doing that? Which, yeah, sorry, that's not specific necessarily to the term trauma, but I think it's probably the two most fundamental things for dogs who have experienced trauma. Does that make sense?
It does, and actually, I think, because it was quite a far-reaching question, I know, but I think that sums it up really well, because it brings us nicely to what we were talking about at the beginning about actually being brave enough, especially as practitioners, to actually say, we're not going to do much. We're going to try and learn more about the dog's truth. We're going to get that needs evaluation done first, and actually take some comfort, from the fact that the dog is connecting to the very basics. I think that's really important. So, Rachel, how can people find out more about your work? You've got we should mention Daniela's Control the Meerkat as well. We can make sure we put links and stuff into the comments on this talk, by the way.
Amazing.
So we can put a chance for a promotion, Rachel. Where can we find more about you and your work?
So Danielle Beck, amazing clinical animal behaviourist, she's putting on the Trauma in Animals conference. That's on the Control the Meerkat website. So definitely, if you're interested in a kind of deep dive into trauma, then that's probably the one for you. I guess the easiest place to access me and my trauma side of work is through the Dogs Impacted by Trauma Facebook group. That's just a Facebook group that I run for anybody who is looking after a dog who is impacted by trauma, or they might work with a dog who's impacted by trauma. It's really a kind of safe space, I hope, to celebrate those little successes that your friends and family might go, that's nothing, like, oh my god, my dog's made eye contact with me for the first time and hasn't peed over it. Like, that's an incredible thing, but very often there's a limited audience who will appreciate what a huge thing that is. So the Facebook group is very much about kind of celebrating those successes and providing emotional support for owners, as well as tons of free kind of information and resources for help and support. So yeah, Dogs Impacted by Trauma is the name of the Facebook group, and anyone's welcome to join and message me.
That is a brilliant group, and actually we'll put it in the comments here, but I think I'm going to put a separate post in the group because I think we need to highlight the trauma conference and also your group as well. I've got a little phrase that I like to give to my clients about what you just talked about there. And I might get it put onto some t-shirts, maybe, I don't know. Let the little wins give the biggest grins. We all like
I love that.
Because it is those little wins, right, that we should be, that I think when people have a dog, who struggles a bit or is sensitive, and just that little thing, and it could be really small, right? Even the fact that the dog's chosen to come in the room with you today, rather than just being in the hallway or the top of the stairs or wherever its normal safe spaces. And so let the little wins give the biggest grins. There you go. You can take that.
I love that.
Well, Rachel, it's been amazing. Every time we talk, it's always amazing, and I'm really glad that today, because we've been a bit selfish in the past because we tend to keep it to ourselves, but today we've done it so other people can listen in, and it's been amazing. I really love what you do, and I love your outlook on stuff, and you're a real gift to the industry. And I think this is something else through the Dog Centered Care really having these chats with different people, because the richness doesn't just come from working with dogs. That's an important part of course, but the richness comes from all of these shared world experiences. So you know, I've never worked in those kind of operations that you have, but I kind of don't need to have done, because I can hear you share your passion. And for me, with the dog centered care project, really, I just invite everybody to take whatever they need as part of their own truth, just those little strands. So just a quickie then, we've got Sheila Harper here chatting live on the 10th of July. Sheila's amazing. Have a look at the events tab. So 10th of July, 3 o'clock UK time. And then on 15th of July, 7 o'clock UK time, we've got Andrea Breen, Dr. Andrea Breen. Wow. So we got some great speakers. Thank you so much. Your dog's just made an appearance there as well.
Yeah, always.
Who's that? Is that Finn?
Yeah, you can't
cool.
not have the attention on him.
Yeah, cool. Well, thank you, darling, and thanks everybody who's tuned in today. And
I honestly just want to say a huge thanks. I know this will probably really embarrass you, and I'm hugely sorry, but I honestly think you're making such a big difference to the industry, and even just getting people talking and appreciating each other's experiences and different points of view, and it's honestly made a huge difference to how I feel working in this industry. So thank you.
Oh, thank you, Rachel. On that note, then we'll say goodbye. Well, thank you so much, Rachel, and thank you everybody who's listened in today. And it's been great.
Thank you so much.
Hopefully you'll come back again.
Thanks for having me. Bye.